Hello everyone, my name is Professor Claire Johnson. I'm the Director of the Australian Catholic University Centre for Liturgy, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this public lecture. In late 2019 and throughout 2020, our world has been challenged and changed by the COVID-19 global pandemic. Many things we have taken for granted have become unavailable, freedoms have been restricted, routine everyday events have taken on levels of risk most of us have not encountered previously. Fear and uncertainty, isolation and loneliness have become familiar attendants to many, as we have learned how to diagnose and treat those suffering with COVID-19, how to prevent infection transmission across entire populations, and how to find ways to live with this virus until such a time as a vaccine becomes available. Greatly beloved people have been lost, and many families have been prevented from gathering to mourn their loss and celebrate their lives without the tangible support of a faith community. Many of us have endured and continue to endure an enforced fast from corporate prayer and the in-person celebration of sacraments that has lasted 6 months in some places. I speak to you from Melbourne, which continues to endure the longest lockdown of any city in the world, and the psychological and spiritual toll this is inflicting has been significant. As we continue to experience this pandemic, we thought it would be a good idea to take stock of what we have been through so far, to look at how our spiritual and prayer lives have changed, and to investigate how we can continue to provide meaningful, hope-filled pastoral care in the time of COVID-19. And we have with us today someone eminently capable of providing great insights into these issues. Our distinguished guest lecturer, Sister Professor Julia Upton, RSM, is a member of the Institute of the Sisters of Mercy of the Americas. She holds a PhD in Theology from Fordham University and is Provost Emerita and retired Distinguished Professor in the Department of Theology and Religious Studies at St. John's University, New York, where she taught for 40 years. Julie has served as a member of the Liturgical Commission of the Diocese of Brooklyn since 1978 and served as an advisor to the Bishops' Committee on Divine Worship of the United States Catholic Bishops' Conference. Julie is the author of numerous articles and books, the most recent of which is Worship in Spirit and Truth, The Life and Legacy of H.A. Reinhold. And she is currently writing a biography of Ada Bethune, a liturgical artist, consultant, and social activist associated with the US Catholic worker movement. In 2019, Julie completed a master's degree in public health and continues to be a highly sought-after writer and consultant. We are greatly privileged to have her join us live from New York City. I invite you to join me in welcoming Professor Julia Upton to deliver her lecture, Liturgy, Prayer, Pastoral Care and Pandemics. Welcome, Julie. And here she is. Welcome, Julie.
Hi, everyone. It's really thrilling to be with you this evening to discuss the important and timely topic. But let us begin by first acknowledging our First Nations peoples. Today, from whatever nation we come, we stand in footsteps millennia old. We acknowledge the traditional custodians whose cultures and customs have nurtured and continue to nurture the many lands of this planet we call home. We honor the presence of these ancestors who reside in the imagination of our lands and whose impressible spirituality flows through all creation. We pray their presence is with us now. Liturgy, prayer, pastoral care, and pandemics. That's a tall order. And while I promise to shed some light, it might not be all the light you need at this time. These are the 4 broad areas that I will be weaving together in this presentation. The year 2020 has brought us into a world few of us could have imagined. When I get into my time machine and go back to the 1st of January, I see myself full of optimism, expecting the best from the perfect year 2020. Perfect vision, orderly universe. Then I see myself watching the nightly news. Troubling reports from Wuhan, China. Ghastly scenes from Italy. Increasing numbers of people dying each day. Gradually, that wave began to engulf us all. If you have ever literally been caught under a wave, you know the panic that seizes you and tosses you until you're finally released. That is what these pandemic times are doing to us all. All of us, some worse than others, all due to this novel coronavirus. So many lives thrown into havoc. Yet, it has been a time of grace as well as challenge. We have come to appreciate all those who have put our needs before theirs, from healthcare workers to those who stock our supermarket shelves. Now we see that they are essential workers. We have anguished over those who suffer alone in hospitals and aged care homes. What has this liminal time taught us? How could it reshape the lives and ministries in the months to come? A sobering multimedia presentation that I think you would all enjoy appeared this summer in Emergence magazine. Emergence is an online publication featuring innovative stories that explore threads connecting ecology, culture, and spirituality. Apocalypse, I love that. Apocalypse incorporates dancers, musicians, and philosophers from across Iceland. It notes that we are going through the greatest social experiment in human history, all of us at the same time, and asks, are we just going to go back as though nothing had happened? Or are we going to see and use the opportunity of having found this pause button? It poses a key question. What is the meaning of this great stop, the apocalypse? As Claire said, I am a New Yorker, and I've lived and worked in the city almost all my life. The events of September 11th, 2001 continue to have a residual effect on me and on my city. Almost 20 years later, I see that the aftermath of that apocalypse significantly affected my perspective on ritual and ritual elements, perhaps forever. That event got our attention. It got the world's attention. That next Sunday, Mass in our parish was packed with crowds of people we only see at Christmas and Easter. They sang and prayed with a fervor I have never experienced before. People of all ages, I imagine, felt lost, confused, frightened, and they came together in simple faith. They remembered from some distant past, longing for stability in a world where the center had ceased to hold. Will they be back next Sunday? I wondered. Well, they weren't, at least not in our parish. Perhaps that's because they did not find anything compelling there that gave them the grounding they so desperately needed. Now, what if the parish staff had been called together September 12th by the pastor. And he had invited some other key parish leaders, including teens and young adults, to join them. Together, they might have been able to discuss how they themselves were feeling, to help assess what losses were experienced by the parish community, and to determine how they might best allow the liturgy to be the primary and indispensable source of the Christian spirit, to unleash the power of the liturgy so that people would be reminded that death and destruction have been overcome by the power of the cross, the death and resurrection of Jesus. We did something similar at the university. I brought together some leaders and we talked about what it would be like to go into the classroom the next day and teach students. And together, with help from our psychological services, we put together a list of things that faculty could do that would give the faculty comfort and then would ease into teaching the class. And the deans helped me, and we went to every single classroom because we had no technology. All the technology was down. The controls were in the Twin Towers. And on every lectern that we placed, these instructions that professors could use if they found it necessary. And we eased that transition. This burning desire people have for ritual to hold and heal has not dissipated. It was horrendous that we weren't able to have funerals for so very long. We might have missed the moment back then, but we haven't missed the only opportunity. The stage is set. The need is genuine. If we don't step into the void, someone or something else will. Here in the USA, we see that need to ritualize in roadside shrines when someone has died, or even people writing messages on coffins, especially when a young person has died. Although we know that the liturgy is the outstanding means by which we express faith, it's not the only one. The home, the domestic church, is actually where faith is first nurtured. Learning to say night prayers, saying grace before meals, lighting the Advent wreath. We should be reminding people often of the importance of the domestic church. When my sister and I were young, my mother, after we had our hair washed on Saturday nights and got ready for bed, we would sit down and read the next day's gospel. It strikes me now what infinite wisdom she had. She found this book called The Word of God, and that's what we did. No, we weren't thrilled by it, but, as I move on toward life, I see how wise all of those practices we had in our home were. For weddings, I often give couples the Catholic household book of blessings and prayers. It has prayers and blessings, short services for every imaginable occasion. A recent lavishly illustrated book is The Theology of Home, Finding the Eternal in the Everyday. It was written and compiled by 3 women with beautiful photographs by a 4th. Rather than prayers, it is composed of reflections on living the domestic church. My favorite by far, though, is Gertrude Müller-Nelson's To Dance with God, Family Ritual and Community Celebration. It's a treasure trove of wisdom, as well as rich ideas for living a fuller life as families. My father was 10 years old during the 1918 pandemic. He used to regale my sister and me with very graphic stories of what those days were like. But that was over a century ago. And during the intervening years, scientists developed vaccines to prevent most of the diseases that coursed through my childhood. Even AIDS, that in the 1980s was always fatal, is now treatable and considered chronic. The same is true for many forms of cancer, with new treatments continually being developed. That's probably why the delusion that it can't happen here remained part of the miasma in which we lived until it did happen. When our university campus went entirely online in mid-March, we expected to be back in the classroom by the end of the month. I never imagined that I wouldn't see those students again except on Zoom. And Easter, how could we celebrate Easter in this alien land? And that we are still relatively sequestered 7 months later is even harder to comprehend. In preparing for this lecture, I had to read back in my journal, even to recall what daily life was actually like in the before. Yes, our sense of liturgy and prayer and pastoral care has been challenged as never before. Through the blessing and advances in technology and the skills we continue to hone in using them, we have found ways to pray together and support each other. It is important for all of us to mine those experiences that we have had personally and to invite others to do as well, first of all, by listening to their stories. And how are you doing is a good place to begin. Since 1987, I have been a regular visitor at Glastonbury Abbey in Hingham, Massachusetts, which is about 250 miles from my home. Not only have I made my annual retreat there, but I used to spend a weekend there every few months for a tune-up, as Brother Daniel calls it. On March 18th, the community of 10 months began streaming their daily Mass at noon each weekday and Sunday Mass at 9:30 a.m., their usual times. Mass is live on the Abbey's Facebook page. At first, one of the monks would use his iPhone for this, but in time, donors came forward so that the community was able to invest in more professional equipment. This has been such a blessing for me and for the 30 or so others who gather each day for Eucharist. Although we are not able to consume the consecrated host physically, we are nonetheless nurtured deeply by the word and the words and the presence of others. Some I have met in person, but many just virtually. We gather together from Hawaii, several New England states, Ireland, and England, most with some prior experience of life at the Abbey. Mass is recorded and remains on the Abbey's Facebook page. By the end of the day, it often had more than 300 views. And Sunday Mass this week had 469 views by 3 p.m. To ensure that I wouldn't be elevating my individual experience to the universal, I invited some members of that virtual community to engage in theological reflection, describing their experience. I asked about the setting. Where did they view Mass? Most of us have been sitting in front of our laptops or iPads. I asked them what their prior experience of daily Mass was and what they have gained from this experience. Some people make comments on the Facebook page. They greet each other, make observations on the feast or the prayers or the homily. Sometimes they add intentions to the universal prayer. They make the usual responses, exchanging peace, etc. While all miss receiving communion, we share having discovered a deeper appreciation for the liturgy as a whole. We each found it easier to be attentive in a virtual world. Some found themselves even taking notes on homilies. Quickly, I saw that live streaming gave me a perspective I never had before, literally standing at the altar, when I would usually be tucked in a corner behind the stalls. For me, this new vantage point raised participation to a higher level. I was riveted. I will admit that feeling has waned some days, but it has also sent me back to reading Odo Kassel and Teilhard de Chardin, wishing I could have a conversation with both of them right now. They both get me to thinking more deeply about presence and rediscovering the mystery that is our life in Christ, given not just for us, but for the life of the world. Know that liturgy is all about presence. The Constitution on the Sacred Liturgy speaks of its many dimensions. Christ is always present in his church, especially in its liturgical celebrations. He is present in the sacrifice of the Mass, not only in the person of his minister, but especially under the Eucharistic species. By his power, he is present in the sacraments, so that when a person baptizes, it is really Christ himself who baptizes. He is present in his word, since it is he himself who speaks when the Holy Scriptures are read in the church. He is present, lastly, when the church prays and sings. But presence is dynamic, not static. You have probably had the experience of being present to something, but having your mind somewhere else completely. It happens often with students. Odo Kassel died in 1948 and Teilhard de Chardin in 1955. What would their reaction to virtual presence be? In 1923, Teilhard wrote The Mass on the World, which was published in 1961 as the first chapter of his Hymn of the Universe. It is a beautiful meditation celebrating Eucharist on the world. He began, quote, "Since once again, Lord, I have neither bread nor wine nor altar, I will raise myself beyond these symbols, up to the pure majesty of the real itself, and will make the whole earth my altar, and on it will offer you all the labors and sufferings of the world." He just might be able to help me ponder this question. Can virtual presence be real? The most difficult part of these months for people has been the absence of the familiar, our go-to places for comfort and support. Churches, libraries, theaters, especially the embrace of others. What used to be simple aspects of daily life, such as grocery shopping, overnight became dangerous ventures into an infectious swarm where too many were hoarding essentials like toilet paper and hand sanitizer. For those sequestered in aged care homes, where even the routines of communal meals or leaving one's room have been disrupted, the pastoral needs are even greater. Many of those who have recovered from COVID-19 are experiencing a mysterious array of after effects. And those who have lost loved ones during the pandemic might be laden with guilt as an after effect, because they weren't able to comfort their loved ones physically, and too many people died alone. I do not believe that anyone dies alone, even if it appears as though they do. I firmly believe that there is a presence, Jesus, loved ones, our guardian angels. Sorry, I don't have that answer, but I have heard and seen this happen. This mystery of death become life as one crosses over from this world to the next. Public health experts tell us that we will be a long time recovering from this trauma. This chart from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration will give you some idea of the journey that we are all on. That's what makes this a particularly difficult time, that we are all experiencing this simultaneously, granted some to a greater degree than others. It is important for each of us, particularly those entrusted with the care of others, to acknowledge what we are feeling and where we might be on this continuum. I see myself down there slogging away at the bottom. Some days when the numbers go down, I might feel like we're coming out of this, and just recently we're all the way back down again. Journaling about this or using some other creative means of expression helps us to tap into our own feelings so that we don't muddy the waters when we go to support others. Public health has also begun to focus on well-being. In Victoria, there is even a Public Health and Well-Being Act that was amended as recently as last month. There are several iterations of the domains of well-being, but the one developed by the Eden alternative is what I have been using in my research. Here I will just list the domains and give an example of how each might have been affected for good or for ill in these pandemic times. Identity, being well known, having personhood or individuality. Now, what might be the impact of losing a job or a career, or having to put one's own work on hold so that you can homeschool your children? Identity is threatened. Growth, development, enrichment, unfolding. Cut off from schools, libraries, museums, sequestered in tight living quarters, one's growth might have been stunted. Those with access to technology, on the other hand, might have found that this is a time of extreme growth because museums have found a way to go online. Lectures one could never have dreamed of attending are suddenly available to the whole world. Autonomy, liberty, self-determination, self-governance. Think of all the limits these times have put on your sense of autonomy. We're not free to go as we please. What we used to do for fun, we can't do. Even gather with people, go out for a meal, go to a movie. We're limited in the ways we can exercise our autonomy, especially those who are in aged care homes. Security. Freedom from doubt, anxiety, or fear. Who has that now in these pandemic times? Connectedness. Belonging, engaged, involved. Depending on one's access to technology, isolation might be a severe problem. Just the fact that we can't touch others is a problem in connectedness. Meaning, significance, hope, purpose. Struggling to find meaning and value in these times might be the most common experience for us all. And then there is joy, happiness, pleasure, delight. Has it vanished? Or have we discovered something anew in these times? I am a relentless optimist, and I hold out hope that Kitty O'Meara's dream for these times may prove true for many of us. And the people stayed home and read books and listened and rested and exercised and made art and played games and learned new ways of being and were still and listened more deeply. Some meditated, some prayed, some danced, some met their shadows. And the people began to think differently. When the danger and made new choices and dreamed new images and created new ways to live and heal the earth fully as they had been healed. Now, that will be a joy. Each of those domains of well-being mark out an area where we can attend to the pastoral needs of others, whether we are teachers, ministers, caregivers, administrators, healthcare workers, or students. We don't have to do this alone either. We can take a lesson from Parramatta, for example. Early in the COVID-19 shutdown period, the leaders of various offices, youth, social justice, pastoral planning, and pre-marriage preparation, for example, who usually spent most of their time visiting parishes, conducting meetings, and running courses, suddenly had to resort to Zoom, telephone, Facebook, and the like. James, the youth coordinator, suggested combining resources and inviting other offices to join as well. With the help of a young person with high-level production skills who put it all together, The Well was launched. It is a wonderful resource. combining resources, and it will surely outlast these pandemic times. And I think it serves as a fine example of what can be done when we come together with common purpose. Their website is organized in categories: spiritual nourishment, care, connection, and community, prayer and worship, service and outreach, ministry and leadership. One of my favorite segments is Worship Wednesdays, which features young musicians from across the diocese who lead a 30-minute prayer session, each session with a different musician and theme. This one was on unity and diversity. Another I appreciate is the focus on Visio Divina, a spiritual reflection tool that can be used by people of all ages in all circumstances. More than 40 years ago, Paul Ricoeur noted that we live in an age of forgetting the signs of the sacred. His response to the forgetting was not to abandon the old symbols in search of new ones, but rather to work toward what he called a second naivete by reinterpreting the symbols, a human hermeneutical circle that renders old symbols newly accessible, without sacrificing either the symbol's integrity or the believer's modernity. His challenge still lies before us. Defined as a performance intended to amuse or divert, entertainment is the exact opposite of ritual prayer, which is intended to focus and redirect us. No wonder there is so much personal disillusionment with the liturgy. It puts too many demands on us in a world which increasingly requires less and less. We expect upbeat music, relevant homilies, and a service that makes us feel good. Who has room for God? Who comes to prayer with an emptiness only God can fill? On March 27th, 2020, Pope Francis gave us a fine example of that kind of prayer. Service was held on a rainy night, addressed to the city and the world in an empty St. Peter's Square. After proclaiming the episode of Jesus calming the storm from the Gospel of Mark, Pope Francis said, and I quote, "For weeks now it has been evening. Thick darkness has gathered over our squares, our streets, and our cities. It has taken over our lives, filling everything with a deafening silence in a distressing void that stops everything as it passes by. We feel it in the air. We notice it in people's gestures. Their glances give them away. We find ourselves afraid and lost. Like the disciples in the gospel, we were caught off guard by an unexpected turbulent storm. We have realized that we are on the same boat, all of us, fragile and disoriented, but at the same time, important and needed. All of us are called to row together, each of us in need of comforting the other." Unquote. The Pope reminded us that embracing the cross means finding the courage to embrace all the hardships of the present time, abandoning for a moment our eagerness for power and possessions in order to make room for the creativity that only the Spirit is capable of inspiring. Well, let us pray for each other in these difficult times, that we embrace the creativity the Spirit is breathing into us and into our world at this time. Thank you very much.
Julie, thank you so much. That was fascinating and fabulous, as I expected it would be. We have a number of questions that have come through for you to consider, and it's my pleasure to moderate some of those questions and forward them to you for you to address. The first one comes from a chaplain at a public hospital, a private hospital actually, St Vincent's Private Hospital in Sydney, and Father Daryl Mackey is the chaplain there, and he wrote this. We are already starting to see signs of mental health deterioration and stress from the community and with our staff in hospitals. Could you make any suggestions of how we could ritualise moving from pandemic to the new normal?
Well, I wonder when we're ever going to be able to do that. And what will the new normal be? The most important thing, I think, at this time is to ritualize the pain of the present. It's ideal if there is a person on the pastoral staff who can pay attention to the employees in the hospital, the doctors, the nurses, the people who clean the floors, work the laundry, or work in the kitchen. All of these people are also suffering. And it helps if there's one person that pays particular attention to them. Not that they have to seek out, but who goes to them and who says, "So how are you doing?" Maybe it's a group that wants to pray together. If you listen to their stories, I believe they will tell you or give you hints of what it is they need at this time. And that we need to acknowledge and ritualize the pain that is ours now.
Thank you, Julie. It takes just a moment for us to switch cameras between New York and Melbourne, so if we take a moment, just please bear with us. That's marvellous. We have another question, Julie, from Michael Taylor, who is Manager of Pastoral Services in Residential Aged Care for Mercy Health in Hughesdale in Victoria. And Michael asks, or makes a comment really, he says aged care here in Australia is in the spotlight at present. Currently a Royal Commission into aged care is underway, and the coronavirus has exposed some of the vulnerabilities in the system. But some good things have been happening in the past few years. He'd be interested to hear your thoughts on how we can strengthen the pastoral and spiritual care for people in residential aged care, especially those that have been cut off from actual visits of family and friends for a long, long time now. And any insights that you might have from the American experience that we can learn from, particularly in regard to aged care settings here.
Thank you, Claire. That question really touches my heart because it's aged care that is the real center of my interest and focus right now. Those domains of well-being that I listed, those are important areas to look to, particularly in terms of aged care. And you can take them even in isolation. So, for example, autonomy. Often in these kinds of settings, there is little autonomy people have. So the greater degree someone can make sure that they get to choose what they're going to eat or when to eat it or when they're going to get up in the morning, that gives them back some autonomy that they need to have. Especially people who are experiencing cognitive decline or dementia, they can still make decisions. It could be about simple things. I've been doing a program called Opening Minds Through Art, which helps to facilitate intergenerational learning and enabling the residents to engage in art, not abstract art, not trying to, everybody draw a tree the way you did in the second grade, but express feelings and emotions, and have a project that they work on for a couple of hours. You develop an interplay between the younger person and the older person, develop a relationship that can get enhanced over time. Have simple directions, but allow them choices. So which kind of paper do you want? You give them two. Do you want this one or this one? Which colors do you want to use? These two or these two? So limit the choices, but let them choose. Autonomy. Don't tell them what they want. So those are just two examples from that list. Another interesting concept with the aged is called Gyrotranscendence. G-E-R-O, transcendence. And this builds on Erickson's stages of life, but it advances it to another level. Everybody's living longer and longer lives, and it's as though we've kind of exhausted Erickson's stages, and we've now got this old stage. And there are certain characteristics that are significant at that particular period of time. And it's not something that is treatable. We find that people narrow their focus, that they're not so interested in getting out and about, but being more contemplative almost. It doesn't mean they're depressed. It might mean that they're more focused, that they're really preparing for the next stage. So acknowledging people at their stage of life and not at our stage of life is really important in aged care. I could go on and on with another whole workshop on aged care, but I'll stop there.
That's fascinating, Julie. I'm sure we've got time if you want to continue with a little bit more on that. If you prefer another question, we can move on to that. Just there where I am again. We have one of our ACU master students has a question. This is Samantha Wegner, who's in Sydney in New South Wales, and she asks, have you encountered reports of people finding some spiritual meaning in the physical and emotional suffering which is brought about and complicated by the circumstances of COVID-19? So are people in what you've heard encountering spiritual meaning through illness, spiritual meaning through the requirements of being quarantined and isolating?
People have been finding spiritual meaning in this time in amazing different ways. A lot of it mediated by technology, but also just by having to stay put. Families are spending more time together. I have a nephew who lives in San Diego. He and his wife have two children, 10 and 11, and they've been sequestered since mid-March. The schools are online. Those schools are not open yet. But it's a wonderful time for them. It's a privileged time. Here they have so much togetherness at a time when the kids, are entering adolescence and they don't want to be around. They're together all the time and talking about things and sharing things. It's a wonderful gift for them. One of the women in that the Glastonbury Abbey Mass group that I did Theological Reflection with, she's Unitarian. She's not Catholic. And when she was going to seminary, they had a retreat weekend at the Abbey. And so that's where she turned in this time. She's there at daily Mass every day. So people are desperately having needs, but they're finding different ways of communicating it. Central Synagogue is a beautiful, beautiful synagogue in New York City, and I attended a virtual bar mitzvah there this spring. Now, I've never been to a bar mitzvah, but this was live streamed from Central Synagogue, and it was wonderful, wonderful. And when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, they prayed Kaddish. And it was the singing, everything was just so beautiful. And that, you know, it's experiences like that that raise up. If it's virtual, it can also be real. Maybe. Next question.
There we go. Indeed. Julie, we have a lovely question from Sister Anna Nichols, who writes, I have enjoyed seeing some of the creativity in liturgies that have moved online. Do you think we're facing a crisis in resisting a move back to what was, rather than embracing the new that we have observed and experienced and combining it with the former? So it's a great question, I think, from Sister Anna Nichols. And she says, have you got any suggestions as churches reopen and allow public worship once again?
Hi, Anna. I'm so glad you could be here. I hope you're well. Well, I think that's a great question. And I think it's exactly the kind of thing that parishes or dioceses need to come together and think about. What is it that we can do virtually? And what is it that maybe we're doing better virtually than we are when we gather everybody together in church? I've found that there has been a reluctance to pay attention to how the shape of ritual worship has changed. So, for example, I did go to the parish church last Sunday for Eucharist, and we have, I think, only 20% capacity, so much of the church is marked off and you can't sit there. And people are very obedient. Everybody is masked. But they're singing this, the organ is blasting, and they're singing the same hymns that we sang before. And it's like they are pretending this is different. This is different. There's a more plaintive tone. And we can't, with all this masks, all of us masked, singing isn't the easiest thing. Maybe we would be better using Taizé chants. You know, maybe it would be a lower key. Let's not pretend we're all back to the way we were. But I do think that there are some ways in which we can pray better together. I mean, when would I be able to be at the Abbey every day for 7 months for Mass? That would never be a possibility. And maybe they will continue to live stream daily Mass. That's not something new, but what's new is live streaming. We've had pre-recorded Masses for people who are shut-ins for decades. That's not the same. You know, one of our, there are 4 sisters in this house, and so in the beginning there were no churches, so we did 4 different experiences of this, and one of the sisters went to one of the sisters went to the Pope's Mass every day. Someone else went to one of these pre-recorded things and lost patience with it because the homily didn't relate to life at all. It was from some other distant time. So, and I really hope we find ways in which we can draw on the best of these. And go check out the well if you haven't checked out the Parramatta's well. Oh, there's so much wonderful stuff there.
Thank you, Julie. That was wonderful. I'm intrigued by the variety of online worship experiences that are available out there, which is something of a smorgasbord at this stage. And we try a number of different things from different countries, different dioceses, and some of them are an iPhone that's on a stand somewhere, and there's no production value of any kind. Others of them have an entire production crew at work, and they're really quite high quality productions. Easter from St Mary's Cathedral in Sydney this year was broadcast on one of our major television networks, which was Channel 7, and it was done extremely well. So there's a huge variety there of experiences. We offer the invitation to folk to pop any questions they might have into the Q&A on Teams here, so we are open for questions from people. You might have something that's quite specific to your particular area of work, and we know we've got folk in education and health. So anything that comes to mind that you'd like to ask, you're more than welcome to. So please go ahead and pop that in the Q&A, and it'll be sent through to us, so we know that that's there. Julie, we in Melbourne have not been able to attend live liturgies since about the end of March. There was a little bit of an opening for a couple of weeks where a handful of people were able to attend, but it's essentially 6 now, coming into 7 months of not being able to attend live worship events. And I'm a bit curious, and I know a number of people are, about whether you think people will in fact return. And as you said, are we offering them something that is worthy of them returning to, frankly? I mean, the experience of Christ is not to be underplayed at all, and that's always going to be something that should hopefully entice people to return. But as you say, if our homilies are not addressing the current reality in a sufficient way, if our music, and we're not allowed to sing in schools even here in Australia at the moment, let alone in worship, at least in some places, what are they coming back to? Do you think there'll be some sort of an impact on the numbers, and what sort of strategies ought the church be employing, or the churches be employing, to get people back?
Well, it isn't to order people back. That's I think that has been tried in a couple of dioceses here, where a bishop says you have to, it doesn't count unless you're physically present. Really, for many people, it's going to be a long time before it's really safe, either because of their age or other health conditions that compromising. But in the end, I think it will be community that draws people back together again, that need to pray and be with each other. My experience at the Abbey is different because I've been a part of that community for so many years and know so many people. It's, that's different. I even wonder about people in the parish church who would sit near me. There was a woman who sat ahead of me who was on oxygen. And I was at outdoor mass at our high school next door. Their opening school mass was outdoors, everybody safely distanced. But this woman's daughter is on the staff. And I asked how her mother was, because I miss her. I miss some of the real, the elderly people that I can imagine what are things like for them. I wish parishes had an outreach that's by phone to every parishioner. As I said, I'm this idealist, but I wish that pastors would get together people and just call everybody and see how they are. How are you doing? What can we do for you? Would you like to pray together, or just see what needs are out there without presuming them?
I've heard of a couple of priests, and I obviously don't know all of them, who are engaging in this, but they are in fact spending their days going through the registrants in the parish and in fact doing that. So calling as many people as they can just to touch base. And I think that's wonderful to hear, and that's pastoral care in a very simple but very effective way. Julie, we've got a couple of questions that have come through. Kathy Morrowwood, who's a liturgist and a liturgical consultant in Hobart in Tasmania, says we are most fortunate to have a church big enough to gather for Mass on Sunday. Rituals such as hand washing and social distancing are constant reminders of the pandemic, and singing while possible is muted. These are challenging our experience of prayer and participation in the liturgy. How might we be attentive to these elements in order to make way for the workings of the Spirit and encounter Christ more fully in these challenging times?
I think it's important to see the ways in which what we are doing is not for ourselves, but for each other. You know, the hand washing, the masks, it's not so much protecting me from you, but you from me. And it also is an opportunity to connect us with the world, with essential workers, but also for the people for whom they don't even have Sunday Eucharist. Eucharist is something maybe they're lucky that they get 3 or 4 times a year. You know, we, especially here in the northeast of the U.S., we've got priests, lots of priests, but that's not true in much of the world. So it's a time to reflect on that and see how we are like them and how this experience can sensitize us to the needs of the broader world. Even clean water, you know, clean water, much of the world lacks clean water. Things we could do something about.
Absolutely. I think I flipped the buttons there, but I will come back on the screen here. Here we go. Still getting used to this technology a little bit. Absolutely, Julie. We're it is a time for us, I think, to take stock of how privileged we've been in having access to the sacraments on such a regular basis, and the reality of the fact that a lot of people don't. We have a large rural diocese in Australia, many of whom are in that situation where they don't have access to a priest on a weekly basis, and that's the norm. So, you know, helping us to understand that experience a little bit more enhances empathy, hopefully, and helps us to understand the needs of others, as you said. We have had people here in Australia sequestered for very long periods of time, and some of us are still in that situation. Some of the people that have been sequestered are single, and Jason's wondering, what are some suggestions for ritualizing in a person's everyday routine from that perspective of pastoral self-care, if there's such a thing. But this dimension of pandemic life hasn't been considered all that frequently in public conversation. It's often focused on the immediacy of the healthcare needs and also the experience of families. But the experience of loneliness and coping with loneliness, particularly for people who are single, has been very, very hard for some folk. And in those domestic prayer routines reminding us of our Christian identities, do you have any suggestions for those who are isolating in as singles?
Well, one is to reach out to others virtually, and another is to engage in prayer, write letters, things like that use one's creative energies, painting, crayoning, coloring, drawing, all kinds of creative expressions, dancing, things like that express our emotions and And the other thing is, just even being centered and feeling one's feelings and owning that, offering it up, praying the Psalms. There's so much that one can do, even single, maybe better single when you're not having to homeschool people, but do all those other things.
Indeed. Embracing the range of possibilities and creativity is something that can certainly be explored. Julia Dell Howard has a question here. She thanks you for a wonderful session and has asked, would you like to comment on the messages Pope Francis, particularly in Laudato Si, has made and the potential impact on our Catholic rituals?
Well, I hope, hi Adele, it's nice to see you. I miss you all so much. That ritual from March 27th, that is available still on YouTube to watch. That was one of the most prayerful experiences I ever had. And there's so much there to mind. He's such a wise person. And yes, Laudato Si, and the homily that he gave that I quoted from that night, a lot of his writings, he just really has his finger on the pulse of the world, the needs of the environment as well as the poor and all the rest of us. There's just so much there. But especially just even, if I were teaching again, I would reuse that ritual to say how they, just the crucifix, it wasn't loaded with things. They were just so simple and prayerfully used and had a wonderful history to them. Just was so, he's wonderful.
That's great. So learning again from what we've been exposed to through the internet and through the the technology that opens up the opportunity to see Pope Francis celebrating rituals and providing leadership again through his actions, even more so than his words in some ways.
It's not all new. I think it was in 2005 that Brother Roger died of Taizé. And I remember that his funeral mass was live streamed, and I attended it on my laptop, in the office, with their beautiful music and everything. So this isn't new. I mean, it has happened before. What's new is this explosion of use of it and Zoom and everything, and especially among people who would have resisted it so much. It's a gift that we have it, but even more amazing, more miraculous is that we're actually using it. Sometimes to its advantage and other times not so well, as you pointed out.
Indeed. Julie, we have another question here from Sam Wagner. Good on you, Sam. She's our ACU Master's student in Sydney, and she's again thanking you for your insights this morning. And she's got, in the past, parish shopping has been frowned upon and discouraged. Now that the pandemic has made it all but compulsory, is the church ready for parish boundaries to blur and for parishioners to arrive back with new expectations post-pandemic?
Oh, absolutely. Long ago, one of the pastors said that we are PBCs, parishioners by choice. And yeah, you need to go where your spirit is nourished. And I've been on that journey quite a few times myself. So yeah, I think that there are even more options available to us these days.
Do you think voting with our feet will elicit change?
I doubt it.
We wait and hope. Yeah. We have a question from Paul Zammit, Catholic Care Melbourne. Hi, Paul. Great to have you. He's got, is perhaps the greater challenge for us as we enter into a COVID-19 normal to reimagine a whole different way of being church, particularly the way ministry is understood and exercised?
I think that, we might have something to learn from Central and South America in the base communities. That communities will be smaller and more connected in ways in which they are not now. When I was growing up, you would meet the people in the grocery store that you were in church with. Now that rarely happens with these mega parishes on Long Island. It's not a smaller church. So I would see that maybe even within a larger parish, there would be smaller, maybe neighborhood groups that would find ways of praying together or being a support for each other. I don't know what post-COVID is going to look like. I just know in many different ways in which 9/11 shaped our lives and our psyches. It's a really long time before I could see an airplane in the sky and not wonder if it was sinister or not. Will we ever receive from the cup again? Or did we just have that gift for while we had it? I don't know. I think we'll be wearing the masks for a long while yet. Mm-hmm. And when they talk about the vaccine, so a really effective vaccine will be 70% effective. Well, that's fine, unless you're, not part of the 70% for whom it is effective.
Exactly.
So it's for me, it's even premature to think about what might that look like. I'm really appreciating what it is I have learned about these simpler times. When I'm not traveling all over the place, when I'm not at meetings every night of the week, where there's more time to think, more time to read. Now, granted, I also retired in June, so that gave me another dimensions of things that I don't have to do. But I think everybody has experienced some wonders in this time. So we've just come out of summer, but in the spring, people were noticing the trees and everything for the first time because they're out taking walks, because they're home and they can do things like that. I don't want to lose that again. So there's some things about this time that I think are really good that I've learned, at least.
Absolutely agree with you. For those of us who have been restricted to a 5-kilometre limit around our homes, we are getting very, very familiar with the streets around and the people also that you meet, even though they're masked on those streets, and their dogs who are being walked more times during the day than they ever wanted to be, I suppose. But yes, that ability to take notice of small beauties that you can see within your immediate location, I think has to be one of the treasures that this time has provided us with. We have a wonderful question here from Sister Dr. Veronica Rosier. She says, in many instances, the fallback position of many priests and parishes seems to be restricted to live streaming of the Mass. It can often feel like a retreat to the pre-Vatican understanding of I'm doing this for you, not only prominent when the priest is now the only one who receives Holy Communion while we look on. How do we begin to enlarge the formation of the ordained, including deacons, that this is not the only way to minister to their people liturgically? The question extends to a post-COVID environment as well.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I really have shied away from those live streamed one-person shows, with the altar and just, me and my altar and these are my people. That to me, that's not a community. But where you have a musician and some other, lector, and some of those that have more of a community gathered that in live streaming them. But there is no reason why we couldn't be live streaming Taizé prayer. The Sisters of Mercy in Burlingame are doing that. And you can go on Taizé's website. They live stream theirs prayer as well. So there are other ways in which we can, share scripture, reflect on it together, have other kinds of discussions. That we do it only for Eucharist. I agree that we could. I haven't heard anybody complaining that they can't go to confession for the past 7 months. The first communions, that was hard on the kids, but now they're doing them outdoors. Very beautiful. So people have found a different way to do things. And so even just connecting this with what Anna said, there could be ways in which young people could do their, Christian prayer together across a country and, that it would nurture their faith in different ways. That's the kind of creativity that I'm hoping we come up with.
Absolutely. Julie, we have a great question here or comment here from Hugo Fernandez, who's a pastoral coordinator of Gertrude Abbott Aged Care in Surrey Hills in Sydney. And Hugo writes, our priests too need our help. Yesterday I went and met 2 priests just to know how things were going with them. The answer was that they were lonely, very lonely. So he's asking, how can we help our priests?
Well, I think all kinds of people who are used to engaging with others as their, principal line of work need to be cared for as well. They need to have different ways in which they can reimagine their ministry or be connected to others. I think that that's true of other people in other aged care settings. That we need to call them. We need to write. Writing letters is something I've taken up again because that's something you can hold and you can look back on and reread. It's less so with a phone call than it's, over with. So I do a combination of both.
Thank you so much. We have kind of a long comment here, but we'll see how much of it we can get on from Father Christopher Lim Mopreme, who is in the Diocese of Wilcannia-Forbes. Diocese of Wilcannia-Forbes is Western New South Wales, and it's about the size of England. It's very remote. He looks after 2 parishes and their outlying areas, separated by 133 kilometres. For the majority of his parishioners, he only meets them every second week for Mass and pastoral care. And he's been reaching out to them for chats and sending greeting cards and assuring them of his prayers, calling them, and he helped the parish primary school in delivering homework to kids at home and sharing his cooking with some of them, among others. It sounds like you're doing an amazing job. Before COVID-19, he says, they were already feeling discouraged due to lack of priests, decline in numbers, scandals in the church, and now we've got this pandemic. And he asks, can you share what hopes and insights he can share with them so that it might inspire them to continue and be faithful in their practice of their Christian lives?
I think he needs to get a cohort of younger people that would help him with all of this. At least it's true here in the States that the younger people, our college age people, they're very, very social justice oriented. And I think he's got some great ideas that other people could help him do and take care of. And then it would also help to make linkages between the young people and older people within their area. So even if he had, take my base community idea, in those disparate areas, get a little cohort, somebody who's a leader. That's one of the things Father Reinhold used to do with young people. He thought that that's where he was not in favor of parochial elementary schools, secondary schools. He thought it was most important to have religious affiliated colleges and universities, that's where you have your kind of training grounds. Got him into a lot of trouble with bishops, but that's another story. But you know, so often they're the ones who feel alienated, and here they could have purpose, that they are really part of this.
Absolutely. Sorry. Jackie from the Office for Parish Renewal has a question here about the domains for well-being, which were very, very helpful. And she was asking, do you see a hierarchy in those domains of well-being if they were to concentrate on one at a time?
No, I don't see a hierarchy in them. But wherever there was the most need for it, I think that's where you ought to concentrate. It's very Abraham Maslow language thinking in terms of this hierarchy of them. But even though this drawing was in a pyramid, it doesn't necessarily meant that way. Although joy is above all joy. But I think there's some of the other elements that are, you know, more grassroots, that where people have great needs.
In terms of a public health question with regard to that hierarchy of well-being, it seems like it's a fairly new area for our public health officials to be thinking about. And I know that, you know, we're referring to it in Melbourne, at least, as questions of psychology or mental health, and of course it is. Well-being is ideally, I think, a body, mind, spirit thing. How from a public health perspective, do you think, or what do you think public health officials should be doing to try and enhance, you know, well-being across a population?
Well, if you look at the World Health Organization's definition of health, it's not about physical health, or it's not about the absence of disease, but it's about the presence of all of these other things, including well-being, socialization, and spiritual well-being. All of that is part of health. I think some of the things that are where they're not attended to is simply because people don't know how to attend to them. So in this country, you know, where we don't have universal health care, the government will pay for physicians to do advanced care planning for their patients, but hardly anyone does it. And my theory has been that's because they don't know how to do it. But if medical practices linked with parishes, and if there could be a, you know, spiritual advisor that would be a liaison to a medical practice, they could have the conversations or train others to have the conversations. But they're the ones who are most used to having these conversations. So to think more broadly. So that's one of my thoughts on that particular. Just invite others who could do it into the conversation into the community under the umbrella.
Thank you so much. Julie, we're almost out of time. I'll just make a couple of concluding comments and thank you. In his book, Pastoral Care and Worship, Australian Pastoral Studies lecturer Neil Pembroke reminds us that in pastoral activity, nurturing hope is essential. God has the final word in every situation, he says, and that final word is hope. Pastoral caregivers are witnesses to hope. Today, Julie has been a wonderful witness to hope as she spoke of the pandemic's wave engulfing us and as she explored ways to find meaning in this great pause we've been tasked with. She shared some of the lessons learned from 9/11 in terms of our longing for rituals that hold and heal and what can occur in spite of the restrictions we operate under. Julie has reminded us of the small, important domestic rituals that help us to maintain our Christian identities while we can't gather in churches. And she's reported on our new ways of connecting virtually and the positives and negatives of those experiences. Julie explored the notion of virtual presence and asked that vexing question of whether it can be real. And she spoke of the presences that accompany us even as we die and even as we might appear to be alone. Julie noted the ongoing nature of trauma and the path to recovery and the new awareness apparent among public health officials of the challenges of maintaining well-being across a population. Julie has provided us with so many rich themes to explore further. May Julie's relentless optimism continue to spread among those of us who have heard her lecture today. Thank you, Julie, for generously sharing your wisdom and understanding with us today. We're most grateful. I'd like to offer a sincere thanks to everyone who has worked so hard to make this event possible, especially our team at the ACU Centre for Liturgy, Marianne, Jason and Sharon, and to our IT consultants, Dustin and Paul. Thank you finally to all those who have joined us for this event. It has been a great pleasure to have your company. We wish you all the very best, and bye for now.